I was falsely accused of cheating on an exam by the school's most popular boy, and on my birthday, my childhood friend brought him over to reconcile with me. We've been classmates for so long. There's no need for things to be this tense, she said. Indeed, there was no need. So I threw away her birthday gift and destroyed everything related to her, completely withdrawing from her world. I thought that would be the end of our interaction. But years later, at a business gala, she spotted me in the crowd at first glance. In front of everyone, the center of attention, my childhood friend's eyes welled up with tears. Was it fun? Hiding from me for 7 whole years. Ding! Story Shots reminds you to click the subscribe button at the bottom right corner to read the full novel. The corridor outside the classroom was packed with students, all craning their necks to peer inside. In just one break, the news that Joe Jones from 3A had accused a classmate of cheating had spread throughout the entire school. Joe stood by his desk with a grim expression, the furniture around him askew from being kicked. Several students gathered around him offering comfort, but their eyes kept darting towards me. I was the classmate who had been accused. Joe's the class president. He might have just made a mistake in trying to maintain order. Everyone makes mistakes sometimes. It's just a misunderstanding. Surely it's not that unforgivable? Someone said. As soon as these words were spoken, many others nodded and looked over at me. They were all waiting for me to speak up and comfort Joe. I met their suggestive gazes and my heart sank. The feeling of being ostracized washed over me once again. The school sorted classes by academic performance, and 3A, being the top class in our year, was one I had fought tooth and nail to get into. Joe had always had a good reputation, handsome, enthusiastic, and known throughout the year as the school heartthrob. On ordinary days, everyone put on a show of being one big happy family. But when real trouble arose, not a single person stood up to speak for me, the newcomer who had joined halfway through. I gritted my teeth as I looked at them, unwilling to back down. It's Joe who owes me an apology. They were about to say something else when Joe suddenly looked up at me. His face was dark, his tone bitter to the extreme. Fine, I was wrong. I shouldn't have spoken up for the sake of the class and discipline. I'm sorry, is that enough, Zane? His manner showed he was extremely unwilling. Before I could respond, he abruptly stood up and left the classroom. Then, there was a commotion outside. Sensing something was amiss, I followed him out of the classroom to see Joe surrounded by a group of people. He was bent over, clutching his ankle, his forehead beaded with sweat and his face pale. A cacophony of voices reached my ears. Joe's parents were just in a car accident recently. He's not in a good state. Did you really have to push him so hard? I can't believe this. Was an apology really that important? The crowd parted, and I stood there, frozen and at a loss. I looked up and met the gaze of Wendy Lambert, who had just come out of the staff room. Wendy had beautiful eyes, usually cold when looking at others, but always carrying a hint of warmth when directed at me. But now, those eyes looking at me were clearly filled with reproach. In that instant, I understood Wendy was blaming me too. Joe Jones suddenly lost his balance and missed a step on the stairs. Wendy Lambert promptly helped him to the infirmary. Joe leaned on Wendy's shoulder, his cold gaze meeting mine with what seemed like mockery. It was indeed mockery. In that instant, I felt as if I had been seen through. Joe had seen through my unspoken feelings for Wendy. I was absolutely certain that the accusation was deliberate. After returning from the infirmary, Wendy finally came to find me. The evening breeze tousled her hair as she leaned on the railing, turning her head to look at me. Is one sentence really that important to you? She asked. Her tone was as casual as ever, seemingly no different. But I could sense it. She, like everyone else, was blaming me. Something caught in my throat, making it impossible for me to speak. After a moment, I lowered my eyes to look at her and gave a bitter smile. I don't understand. How is it that his act of playing the victim makes me the one who's done wrong? Wendy looked at me, startled for a second. Perhaps my bitter smile was too unsightly, as Wendy's tense demeanor relaxed. What do you mean, playing the victim? He really did hurt his ankle. Besides, I didn't say you did anything wrong, Wendy said, looking away. I just think there's no need to make such a fuss about it. The urgent school bell rang, causing my heart to sink with each chime. I stood there, silently watching Wendy, as an inexplicable feeling of betrayal washed over me. Was it really about not making a scene, or was there something else? When school ended, Wendy was nowhere to be seen. Joe's seat was empty too. Someone passed me a message, saying Wendy had something to do and told me to go home by myself. I nodded with an "oh," feeling rather indifferent. On the way home, groups of 2 or 3 walked together, chatting and laughing. I cycled along with my head down, lost in a flood of memories. In our old neighborhood, Wendy was quite well known. Everyone knew Wendy had a cold personality, but she was fiercely protective. Whenever I got into an argument with anyone, Wendy would rush to my defense without hesitation. I lost my parents when I was young and lived with my gran in the old neighborhood. Wendy used to follow me around, calling me big brother this and that, but gradually, she became awkward about using those words. She started calling me by my full name, Zane Smith. I carried Wendy's backpack for her, looking at her lazily. Getting cocky now, are we? Calling me by my name. As if I'd seen through her. She lowered her head and mumbled, "What big brother? You're only a few days older than me." As if deliberately opposing me, she puffed up her cheeks and shouted, "I'll call you Zane, Zane, Zane." Wendy thought I would tell her off like before, so she turned and ran away quickly. But I didn't. I stood there for a while, then resigned myself. All right, I can't control you anymore." Then I chuckled softly. Actually, I don't like being called big brother either. When I came back to my senses, it was already dark. The distance between school and home wasn't far, but on this stretch, my head had spun around like a top 108 times. On the dim little road, there was no sign of the familiar figure I was looking for. The next day, Wendy waited for me to go to school together as usual. It seemed like nothing had changed. However, on the way, I couldn't help but ask Wendy, trying to sound casual, why she came back so late yesterday. Wendy explained lightly that she was delayed because of something. She didn't give a reason, but I soon found out why. As soon as we entered the classroom, I saw Joe look up and smile at Wendy. "Morning, Wendy. By the way, thanks for taking me home yesterday." I froze on the spot, slowly raising my head to look at Joe. His smile was handsome, but I had never found someone's smile so annoying. Actually, I had heard about it before transferring to Class 3B. Joe and Wendy were quite close. I wanted to pretend I didn't care, but I couldn't fool myself. Cared very much. So the something Wendy mentioned was taking Joe home. I pressed my lips together, feeling inexplicably angry. For the entire day, I didn't initiate any conversation with Wendy. During break, Joe suddenly came over and placed a bottle of water on my desk. I turned my head, but before I could do anything, there was a shattering sound. Immediately after, Joe's shout echoed through the classroom. Many people turned to look, and the classroom suddenly fell into an eerie silence. Joe's face darkened. He stared at the shattered water bottle on the ground in disbelief, his voice frustrated. "I just wanted to apologize to you for what happened the other day, mate." The bottle was in pieces, water splattered everywhere. Joe took a deep breath and turned his head, saying resignedly, "Let's just say I didn't hold it steady." But the more he explained that he didn't hold it steady, the more gazes fell on me. I was all too familiar with the meaning in those eyes. Looking at Joe in front of me, I instantly understood. It was this tactic again. I absolutely hated being falsely accused. Taking advantage of Joe's moment of resignation, I suddenly grabbed him and started walking towards the staff room. "Stop pretending. I didn't even touch the bottle. Let's go check the CCTV with the teacher." Joe was stunned for a second, his face turning pale. He refused to move. Things got heated for a moment. After a couple of steps, someone suddenly blocked my way. "That's enough." I frowned, looking down to meet Wendy's face. It felt like a bucket of ice water had been dumped over me. I felt completely chilled to the bone. Wendy hadn't initiated any conversation with me all day, but her first words of the day were to speak up for Joe. I knew very well that the reason Joe was doing all this was because of Wendy. She looked up at me, her expression seeming a bit impatient, yet also somewhat helpless. "Stop making a fuss. Class is about to start." Again, that nonchalant attitude. Again, those casual words clearly favoring Joe. The anger that had been bottled up in my chest since last night suddenly surged uncontrollably. My face instantly darkened, and I pushed Wendy away. "Wendy, is this amusing to you? Why should I be falsely accused by Joe again and again? Are you going to say it's unnecessary this time too?" "Yes, it might not matter to you, but it's important to me." The sudden outburst left Wendy stunned for a couple of seconds. She stared at me blankly, as if she hadn't expected such a strong reaction from me. After a while, she blinked and choked out, "That's not what I meant." I insisted on checking the CCTV footage, but Joe Joan held me back. "It was my own fault. There's no need to bother the teachers with such a small matter." Anyone with eyes could see the problem wasn't with me. This time, many of those who had previously defended Joe didn't speak up. I sat back down, feeling incredibly frustrated. Wendy Lambert slipped a bottle of cold water into my hand. She looked at me with downcast eyes. "Zane, I didn't mean it like that." I ignored her. For the next few days, Wendy constantly hovered around me. Wendy and I rarely argued. After school, I turned to leave immediately. Wendy, seemingly unable to take it anymore, suddenly grabbed my sleeve. My wrist felt cool, adorned with an expensive new watch. It was the watch I had glanced at a couple of times online, with a price tag so high I dared not look a third time. Even for Wendy, who came from a well-off family, it wasn't something to be bought on a whim. I stood there, stunned, as Wendy looked up at me. "Stop being angry with me, please." I instinctively moved to take it off and return it, but Wendy stopped me. "I always meant to give it to you. It's just a bit early for your birthday." My face remained stern, but I felt my anger dissipating. When I got home, I berated myself for being so easily swayed. Just as I finished, my phone rang. My aunt's voice came through, asking if I'd considered her offer and when I'd transfer to her school. I stared at the watch on my wrist and said softly, "I'd like to stay here a bit longer." After my grandmother passed away, Wendy was the only reason I had left to stay here. In the days that followed, Wendy never mentioned Joe in front of me again. I thought we'd both lost touch with Joe. But on my birthday, I heard some news. Wendy had been going for walks and hanging out with Joe after school every day. My heart sank instantly. A thunderous roar echoed across the sky. It was pouring rain on my birthday. Wendy was supposed to pick up the cake, but she had a last-minute errand and asked me to get it instead. I wanted to ask for more details over the phone, but Wendy hung up quickly. I reassured myself that I could get the full story when we met. After collecting the cake, I stepped outside only to realize, to my dismay, that the rain had intensified. Even worse, my car had broken down. The distance to the meetup location Wendy had set wasn't too far. I trudged along, one hand holding an umbrella, the other carrying the cake. Despite my efforts, I still got quite wet. Wendy rarely asked me to pick up my own birthday cake. She must have had something more important to attend to. I kept reassuring myself of this right up until I reached the door. But then I heard Joe's voice coming from inside the private room. I froze in place, listening to his voice drift lightly through the doorway. With a hint of laughter in his tone, he said, "Thanks, Wendy dear, for agreeing to pick me up in this downpour." The door wasn't fully closed. After a moment's hesitation, I numbly looked up and realized everyone had arrived except me. There were even some unfamiliar faces in the crowd. Among the group, I saw the one face I least wanted to see. It wasn't my imagination. Joe was really here. Someone must have noticed me because suddenly everyone turned to look. My bedraggled state was on full display, and an awkward silence fell for a moment. Joe turned to look as well. He stood calmly beside Wendy, his clothes neat and dry, in stark contrast to my appearance. Water was dripping from my sleeves. I stood before everyone, soaked through and holding the cake, like a pathetic clown with nowhere to hide. I had never felt so humiliated. Bristling with irritation, I locked eyes with Wendy, gritting my teeth as I looked at her. I asked, "Why is Joe here?" Wendy hadn't expected me to arrive in such a state. Her face immediately changed. I felt my anger building in my chest, ready to explode at any moment. I stared at Wendy without moving, repeating my question, "Why is Joe here? Have you been with him all this time? Did you come here with him today?" Joe had arrived clean and dry. While on my birthday, I looked like a drowned rat, the laughingstock of everyone present. Wendy knew full well how much I despised Joe. I had said more than once that I never wanted to see Joe again. Why did it have to be today of all days? Why when I was at my most vulnerable? Wendy stood frozen, then hurriedly tried to explain. "Joe said he wanted to apologize to you properly today. He invited quite a few people to witness it and even prepared a birthday gift. So I thought." Wendy suddenly gripped my wrist tightly. "I wanted to clear up the misunderstanding today. Joe's really not that bad, you know. There's no need for things to be so tense between you. No need. Again, no need. Indeed, there was no need." I looked at Wendy, silently prying her fingers off my wrist. Then I took off the watch on my wrist and tossed it to her. Unlike last time, I didn't demand answers. I didn't say anything at all. Something I had clung to for so long suddenly became something I no longer wanted. The day I left, I didn't tell Wendy. It was just an ordinary afternoon when I finally closed the chapter on Wendy and me. My aunt helped me with the transfer paperwork. She said that when my name was mentioned, suddenly a girl rushed out during class time. Choking with tears, she asked over and over again where I had transferred to. My aunt asked me if she was a close friend. I shook my head and smiled. "Not anymore." My aunt didn't tell Wendy Lambert. Wendy wouldn't be able to find me either. "Dane, how can you be so relaxed? Aren't you nervous? The boss said all the big names in the industry will be at tonight's gala." I was pulled back to reality by my colleague Damon Lloyd's voice beside me. The bustling ballroom before me was brilliantly lit and exquisitely luxurious. It had been exactly 7 years since I transferred schools that year. After transferring, I had no other concerns and threw myself into studying. I performed exceptionally well on my A-levels. After university, I smoothly entered this company. Coming back to my senses, I paused for a second. "Don't worry. Nobodies like us won't have anything to do with it. You a nobody? You've climbed to a position in 3 years that others can't reach in 10. Just as he finished speaking, there was suddenly a commotion at the front of the hall. Vaguely, I seemed to hear a few cries of "Miss Lambert" mixed in. Damon swallowed beside me. "Miss Lambert? The heiress? Not only is her family wealthy, but she's also running her own company successfully. She's actually here." I slowly furrowed my brow, as if remembering something. I looked up. I only saw a beautiful figure surrounded in the middle, her simple yet elegant custom-made gown clearly worth a fortune at first glance. That profile, a sense of familiarity washed over me. "Zane!" A voice interrupted all my thoughts. Quite a few people around were trying to strike up a conversation. But this person's gaze pierced through the crowd, fixed firmly on me. In full view of everyone, she even walked towards me step by step. "Was it fun?" Wendy stared at me, her eyes rimmed red. These whole 7 years of hiding from me. The hall fell silent, with almost every eye fixed on me. Scrutiny and whispers. Everyone was wondering how a lowly employee like me had suddenly become connected to Wendy Lambert. I lowered my head helplessly, meeting Wendy's gaze. She seemed to have changed over the years, yet somehow remained the same. Gone was the naivety of her youth. After years of navigating the corporate world, she now exuded an aura of formidability. These days, Wendy Lambert was someone most people felt compelled to flatter. I took a step back, creating some distance as I quietly observed her. Reunited after so long, yet I found myself with nothing to say, just like 7 years ago. Perhaps my retreat was too abrupt, as Wendy suddenly froze in place. She looked up at me, her voice choked with emotion. "Are you still trying to avoid me?" The boss stood nearby, his eyes blinking rapidly like a camera shutter, his hint obvious. Over the years, I'd learned to schmooze with the best of them, spouting pleasantries with ease. But I had no desire to put on airs for Wendy. I simply asked her coolly, "Who are you to me that I should bother avoiding you?" With those words, many faces in the room changed color. Wendy's complexion paled noticeably. "Who am I to you?" She stared at me, a mix of resentment and hurt in her eyes. Wiping the corner of her eye, she asked softly, "Zane, do you need me to remind you?" Remind me of what? Of how blatantly she had favored Joe that year. Or of that miserable birthday in the pouring rain. The years of buried humiliation and frustration surged up once more. I suppressed my emotions, letting out a short laugh before speaking with a hint of coldness. "Wendy." I looked her in the eye, asking with genuine curiosity, "Who exactly are you to me?" Wendy Lambert must have had it too easy these past few years, being put on a pedestal by everyone. She frowned, the anger in her eyes evident. Those eyes glared at me fiercely, but when she spoke, her voice was slightly hoarse. "Say that again?" The atmosphere froze. The boss seized the opportunity to step in front of me, subtly pushing me out. The cold wind outside the door dissipated the emotions. I hadn't expected to get angry because of Wendy again. Damon Lloyd chased after me and handed me a bottle of water, saying fearfully, "Miss Lambert looked so scary just now. How do you know her?" The cool sensation slid down my throat as I replied wearily, "Let's call it a night. I'm heading home. Could you let the boss know for me?" I had just reached the car park when Damon's message popped up. "After you left, Miss Lambert walked out without looking back. You don't think she's gone to find you, do you?" My brow twitched. From behind me came the faint, urgent sound of high heels striking the ground. Wendy had caught up. She had run in a hurry, her chest heaving. She looked up at me and said plaintively, "How could you leave without saying goodbye? Are you planning to disappear without a trace again?" I stared at her silently, with no intention of speaking. But Wendy seemed to be ignited by my calm demeanor. Her emotions were on the verge of collapse. "You've been hiding for 7 years. Don't you have anything to say to me?" I corrected her. "I wasn't hiding." "Then why did you leave without a word? Why did you transfer schools without saying anything? If I hadn't come to find you, were you really planning to never see me again for the rest of your life?" I leaned against the car and laughed. "Who still remembers ancient history?" Those words seemed to pierce Wendy. She stared at me, suddenly bursting into tears. "You don't remember? Zane, how dare you not remember?" Those words felt like a heavy hammer, striking hard at the heart of 17-year-old Zane. I forced out a cold laugh from my throat, staring at Wendy. "Why should I remember? Wendy, who do you think you are? Why should I remember that feeling of utter humiliation and embarrassment?" "Of course I'm nobody." Wendy's face turned pale as she cried. "But I won't let you forget." I didn't want to dwell on this topic any longer. As I turned to leave, Wendy blocked my way. I thought I could control my emotions. But seeing Wendy's self-righteous expression, I couldn't help but laugh. Wendy looked up at me, stubborn and hurt. "Do you know how long I've been looking for you? Do you know how happy I was to see you today?" Before she could finish, a sudden crash echoed through the quiet car park. I turned towards the sound and saw Joe Joan, who had appeared at some point, standing not far away. Something had shattered on the ground. Joe stood there, staring straight at us, still holding Wendy's coat in his hand. For years, Joe Joan had been by Wendy Lambert's side. They attended the same university. After graduation, Joe joined Wendy's company. This time, Wendy came without him, and he rushed over to surprise her. He stared at Wendy, his face dark. This expression, overlapping with the Joe from years ago, made me look away. I glanced back at Wendy and let out a laugh. The mockery in that laugh was too obvious, and Wendy's face turned completely pale. Joe walked over. His eyes looked at me with irritation and disgust, yet he still forced a smile and greeted me. He said, "Long time no see, Zane. You transferred schools without a word back then. I never got to properly apologize to you." As he spoke, he naturally slipped his arm around Wendy's. A clear declaration of ownership. Just like years ago. Over the years, he didn't seem to have changed at all. But before I could respond, Wendy suddenly pulled her arm away. She stared at Joe and asked in a soft voice, "Joe, have I ever told you that if you want to keep your job at the company, you should stop talking nonsense?" With those words, Joe's face suddenly turned as white as a sheet. But he still reached for Wendy's wrist. "Wendy, are you still upset about what happened last time? I won't do it again. Let's not fight. We'll talk when we get back. Okay?" He was afraid Wendy would say something in front of me. Wendy stepped away from him and looked up to explain to me, "There was an accident years ago. Joe saved my family, so my mom arranged for him to join the company. Joe and I—" "Stop!" Joe suddenly interrupted Wendy. His voice was low. "Don't do this to me. Let's go back. All right?" Wendy ignored him and finished her sentence. "Joe and I have never been together." Wendy Lambert's explanation and Joe Jones' irritated voice invaded my brain. The scene of our reunion after so long was chaotically painful. They seemed to say a lot, but I barely took any of it in. I only remember that when my headache made me want to leave, Wendy grabbed my wrist. Her fingers gripped tightly. Wendy said that in all these years, she had never forgotten me. She asked me again what she could do for me to forgive her. It was strange. The person I didn't care about back then. How did she become so devoted and emotional after 7 years? I couldn't understand it, nor did I want to delve into it. I pried her hand off and silently mouthed 3 words to her face. "Stop pretending." After distancing myself from Wendy, I got in my car and left without looking back. I didn't want to have any more contact with them. But early the next morning, the company's WhatsApp group exploded. Messages came one after another, each more sensational than the last. "Bloody hell. Whose Porsche is that parked next to the company entrance? That number plate starting with 6. Blimey. I saw the owner. She's gorgeous. But her aura was a bit intimidating. Didn't dare look twice." The last time the group was this lively was when some bloke's wife publicly beat up his mistress. I sat up abruptly, staring at the screen, all traces of sleepiness gone. A name was about to escape my lips. When I arrived at the company, that Porsche was parked ostentatiously next to it. Quite a few people were sneaking glances, gossiping. The owner seemed indifferent to their attention. She leaned against the car, head down, lost in thought. That familiar profile made me certain in an instant. Wendy Lambert. As if sensing something, Wendy looked up sharply. She gazed at me silently, expressionless. But usually, this stance meant she wouldn't give up easily. She was angry that I had left without a backward glance last night, so she came to the company early to confront me. "Can we talk?" she asked. "About what?" I found it amusing. What could we possibly have to talk about? "A lot." Wendy looked at me earnestly. "There's so much I've wanted to tell you all these years. What if I say I don't want to?" Wendy stared at me for 2 seconds. "You should know. Patience is something I have in abundance." "Suit yourself," I said, averting my gaze and walking straight into the company without looking back. Wendy Lambert remained steadfast at the bottom of the building. Damon Lloyd and the new female intern occasionally glanced down from the office. "Isn't that Miss Lambert? Has she gone mad? Standing in the rain like that?" Haley Barnes, the intern, leaned in obediently. "Is she really here for Mr. Smith? She must have done something to upset him." Damon took a sip of his coffee. "Look who's talking." Haley put on a knowing face. "Of course, Mr. Smith is so good-natured. He rarely refuses anyone. Women can be so troublesome." Damon gave her an odd look. "Aren't you a woman? How can I compare?" Haley exclaimed. "I would never upset Mr. Smith. I only want to care for him." I glanced out the window, where a drizzle had started to fall. The autumn rain was particularly cold. Wendy stood there with her umbrella, her gaze fixed upwards. She stood there alone, and though I couldn't make out her expression clearly, it wasn't hard to imagine. Always cool, always calm, with a touch of stubbornness. This was how she used to look when trying to make me smile after upsetting me. Once Wendy set her mind to something, few could stop her. After all these years apart, Wendy seemed even more persistent than before. I turned away without a word. As darkness fell and the office emptied, I finished my overtime work and glanced down once more. Wendy was still there. I shut down my computer and left through the back door. That evening, Damon Lloyd created a group chat where he and Haley Barnes took turns trying to pry open the story between Zane and Wendy. I was forced to stay up late into the night. After the chat, while I was brushing my teeth, the group suddenly exploded with 999 plus messages, all filled with caring words from the two of them about Wendy. Before bed, Haley sent me a private message. "Zane, I vented for you. How's that?" Haley has always been one to talk big, so I didn't take it too seriously and just replied telling her to get some sleep. The next day, Wendy was still there. She was determined to be a nuisance. I glanced at her and skillfully entered the company through the back door. Shortly after I got in, there was a sudden commotion in the office. Even the boss was alerted. When Damon came back after getting the gossip, he had a complex expression on his face. "Wendy, I frowned. "What did she do?" "She probably wants to add you on WhatsApp. Ignore it." "I definitely didn't give it to her." Damon pointed downstairs. "But there are plenty of people willing to share it." Under my gaze, Damon reluctantly continued, "She's offering £10,000 to anyone who gives her your WhatsApp." The next second, my phone vibrated. There was a new WhatsApp message. It was from a colleague in the neighboring department. "Sorry, Zane. She offered way too much." Bowing head gif. My phone vibrated again. Another contact request popped up. "This is Wendy Lambert." I massaged my temples, feeling a headache coming on. Before I could process this news, another commotion erupted. It seemed like all the surprises of the past 3 years had been condensed into these few days. A flashy sports car pulled up provocatively in front of the Porsche. Gossip was always irresistible. Many people crowded around the windows to watch. "Who's that now?" "No idea, but wait, they're getting out." "Hang on. Doesn't that person look familiar? Isn't that the new rich intern working under Zane?" My eyebrow twitched as I looked closer. Sure enough, it was Haley Barnes. Haley got out of the car, removed her sunglasses, and gave Wendy a once-over before smirking and flipping her off. She seemed to say something, though I couldn't make it out clearly. It certainly wasn't anything pleasant. I sighed and grabbed my phone as I headed downstairs. By the time I reached the ground floor, the two were already in a heated argument. I knew full well that Wendy wasn't one to back down easily. After years of privilege, how could she tolerate being provoked by a university student who hadn't even graduated yet? Haley had a large, purplish bruise at the corner of her mouth. She dabbed at it, looking down at me with an innocent expression. "It's all right, Zane. Even though she hit me first, I gave as good as I got." Haley hadn't been with the company long and had always been protective of her face. I knew she was trying to stand up for me, but I hadn't expected it to escalate to this level. Suddenly feeling irritated, I turned to Wendy with a cold stare. "What's wrong with you?" Even if Haley said something offensive, did you really need to hit her first? As soon as the words left my mouth, Wendy, who had been standing frozen nearby, slowly raised her head to look at me. She seemed more disheveled than ever before. Her face wasn't in any better shape than Haley's. If anything, it looked worse. She seemed indifferent to her injuries, her face pale and her eyes filled with shock, hurt, and disbelief. "I hit her first?" Haley let out a small hiss beside me. "Don't be angry, Zane. These little scratches will heal in a few days. It doesn't hurt much. Let's head back to the office." As we turned to leave, Wendy suddenly grabbed my wrist. She looked at me defiantly, tears streaming down her face. "So you just take her word for it, without even asking me? You've decided I hit her first based on what she said." I shook off her hand. "If you want to talk, we can discuss this thoroughly after work." Haley turned her head, flashing a smirk at Wendy. Wendy stayed until closing time. She kept a straight face, not dealing with anything, just waiting stubbornly until evening. I left the office with Haley. As Wendy approached, about to speak, Haley suddenly let out a soft hiss. She reached out to me. "Zane, my hand hurts so much. I'm afraid I can't drive." Seeing that hand, Wendy suddenly felt a sting on her face. Then, as if realizing something, she stepped forward and looked at me. "You promised we'd talk." Haley lowered her eyes. "I can bear the pain if I must. If Zane has something to do, don't worry about taking me home." I looked at Haley. "I'll take you home first." Wendy stood there, staring at me in disbelief. The light in her eyes gradually dimmed. On the way, Haley confessed to me. "Zane, actually, I hit her first. She used to treat you like that, so she deserved to know how it feels not to be trusted." I could tell. I looked at her. "Don't use this method again. It'd be a shame to damage such a pretty face." Haley was stunned for a moment, then smiled with her eyes curving. "All right." When I returned, it was getting dark. Wendy stood in the dim light, surrounded by emptiness. Somehow, her appearance reminded me of an abandoned animal. But Wendy was never my possession. I looked at her. "After all this fuss, say what you need to say clearly." During the day, I didn't hit first. Wendy was silent for a while, then abruptly blurted out this sentence. I hadn't expected Wendy to still be hung up on this. "That's not important. Get to the point." "It is important." Wendy persisted on this issue, staring at me. "Zane, you never used to take sides like this." That word, "used to," felt so distant now. After all these years, people change. Besides now, for me, Haley isn't just anyone, but you are. The sky had almost turned completely dark. The night was cold. Wendy stood still, softly repeating those two words. "Just anyone." She slowly lowered her eyes, forcing a smile. When she spoke again, her voice was choked. "A few days before your birthday after school, I was indeed with Joe. He kept looking for me, wanting to apologize to you. I knew you didn't like seeing him, so I didn't dare let you know. On your birthday, Joe said he had already bought a birthday gift and found many people just wanting to sincerely apologize. That's why I helped him. All these years, there's never been anything between Joe and me." After explaining, Wendy finally looked up. Her eyes fell on me, reflecting my image. She quietly waited for my response. "Okay, I see." I tightened my coat. "Are you done? Let's go home then, it's quite cold." Wendy looked at me, suddenly reddening her eyes at these words. "So after leaving without a word for so long, don't you have anything you want to say to me?" It's quite laughable, really. All these issues Wendy mentioned, I've thought about them countless times at night after transferring schools. How could Wendy, who was so close to me, suddenly favor another boy she had only known for a short time? I could never understand it, and I couldn't forget Wendy. So I was troubled for a long time. Wendy's presence permeated every aspect of my life, and I kept telling myself over and over that it was all in the past. It wasn't until now, when I no longer cared, that I received this feeble explanation. "No." I looked at her. "Everything's been explained clearly. Wendy, let's part ways here." "I don't want to." Wendy suddenly came over and threw herself into my arms. Her fingers tightened, and her voice trembled as she spoke. I could feel Wendy crying heavily. She said, "Zane, after you transferred that year, I looked for you for so long. That day, I didn't expect the rain to be so heavy. All these years, I've been thinking, if only I hadn't asked you to get the cake, if only I hadn't agreed to Joe's words. But you left so quickly, without giving me a chance to explain." I asked in return, "Was it me who didn't give you a chance, Wendy? Time and time again, when did you not favor Joe?" Yes, these were all trivial matters indeed. But Wendy, you've always been so clever. Could you really not tell whether Joe's words were true or false? "I'm sorry. What happened before won't happen again." Wendy's voice choked. "Don't avoid me anymore. That year I ran through so many cities, but I couldn't find you anywhere." My chest was wet with her tears, cool in the cold wind. I had never imagined before that someone as proud as Wendy would cry so miserably. She always liked to follow behind me, and I could easily solve any trouble she got into. Back then, I never thought there would be a day when Wendy and I would be apart. But reality taught me that relying too much on one person will eventually lead to a hard fall. I fell and it hurt badly. Took many years to forget. I pushed Wendy away and said softly, "Let's end it here, Wendy. Don't come looking for me again in the future." Wendy's eyes were rimmed with red, her face pale, her voice so hoarse she could barely speak. I turned and walked back. I heard a very low and soft voice from behind, filled with pain and sadness. She said, "I can't do it." Later on, the Porsche no longer appeared next to the company. However, every morning, someone from the flower shop would come to deliver flowers to the company. "Mr. Smith, these flowers are freshly picked. We wish you a pleasant new day." At noon, someone would also come specially to deliver lunch. Damon Lloyd leaned over. "Isn't this from our favorite restaurant? It's incredibly expensive." The restaurant staff smiled and said, "Mr. Smith is our top-tier VIP. If you have any favorite ingredients, just let us know anytime." It wasn't just this restaurant. Every shop I had visited had registered me as a VIP under my name. Even the mortgage on my current house had been paid off in advance by someone. One by one, it wasn't hard to guess whose handiwork this was. This Wendy Lambert. Damon's eyes widened as he thought for a while, finally scraping out a few words from his brain. "She's really loaded." I had tried to contact her many times to return the money, but Wendy had refused every time. She said to consider it as compensation for past regrets. I saw Wendy again during the company's team-building camping trip. The boss said that tonight there would be a rare meteor shower. The best viewing spot was right where we were. On the way, Damon and Haley Barnes were chattering nonstop, making my ears ache. Finally reaching the destination brought some peace and quiet. But then I saw Wendy. She stood not far away, in the wind, having resumed her usual cold and unapproachable demeanor. The Wendy with tear-reddened eyes from that night seemed like a dream to me. She looked over from afar. She smiled at me and said, "What a coincidence." Haley, who was grilling skewers, snorted, "Ms. Lambert, you're quite the joker. Your company is 1,000 miles from here." "Indeed," Wendy nodded. "But our branch office is here." "Since when did you have a branch office?" Haley asked. Wendy replied nonchalantly, "Just now." Haley rolled her eyes. "You're mental." Wendy wasn't joking. Her branch company was indeed going to be established here. However, her claim about bringing employees for an early team-building exercise was a bit less believable. Among that group, I still saw Joe Joan, but he had toned down a bit, staring at Wendy without rushing over like last time. Wendy walked over on her own initiative and stood chatting with the boss. The boss had always wanted to cooperate with Wendy's company, so naturally, he wouldn't refuse. As they chatted, the boss's topic fell on the food ingredients Wendy had brought. Wendy was incredibly generous. The supplies she brought for team building were a full 2 times more than what the boss had brought. Wendy seized the opportunity and asked, "Why don't we join together? It'll be livelier." The boss happily agreed. Haley sneered, "That wicked Wendy. She's obviously here for Zane." The boss smacked her head hard. "You think I can't see that? Free benefits, might as well take advantage." Haley deliberately overcooked the boss's skewer before giving it to him. "Isn't this selling out?" The boss sighed. "Haven't you noticed? Your Zane has long since moved on." With the 2 companies together, it indeed became much livelier. However, whatever I did, Wendy insisted on coming over to help. She took the skewer from my hand, and as it sizzled with oil, she asked me, "How have you been lately?" I said, "Everything's been quite good." "That's good to hear." While chatting with Wendy, I could feel Joe's gaze fixed on me, unmoving. Later, he also found an excuse to come over and talk to me. I thought he might have changed, until that hot soup spilled on his hand again, just like 7 years ago. That's when I realized he hadn't improved one bit. Everyone around was drawn by the sound. People from both companies looked at each other, unsure of what to say. Joe probably wanted to use his old tricks, trying to make it impossible for me to stay in this company. In the past, he had indeed succeeded. I had never fit in with the third-year class. But now, before I could say anything, Damon and Haley quickly surrounded us. Bloody hell! Are you never going to stop? Please, if you're going to frame someone, at least look at the situation. This is our company's territory. You think you can just mess with Zane? Besides, even if Zane did do it, you deserve it anyway. A barrage of words rained down. Things didn't develop as he had imagined. Joe stood frozen, looking at them. The words he was about to say stuck in his throat. He turned his gaze towards his own company, his face dark. But Wendy blocked his view, standing in front of him. She looked at Joe, her voice cold and devoid of any warmth. Joe, submit your resignation letter when you get back to the company. It's time for you to move to a different city. With these words, no one else dared to speak up for Joe. The color drained from Joe's face. I picked up some cold water from nearby and poured it over his head. With a splash, the cold water poured down. Joe shivered violently. He looked up at me, incredulous. I looked at Joe, smiling as I told him, "This time it really was me. You wanted me to pour something on you so badly. How could I not oblige?" The cold wind had been blowing all day, and we still hadn't managed to see the meteor shower. While Wendy went to fetch a scarf, it was too dark around us, and she twisted her ankle after a misstep. She sat on the ground, her face pale. By the time I realized what had happened, Wendy had already grabbed my wrist. The car couldn't make it up this mountain path. Wendy's voice was pleading, "It hurts so much. Please help me." I sighed, but eventually decided to carry her down the mountain on my back. The night air was chilly, yet Wendy's forehead was covered in a fine sweat from the pain. Clinging to my back, she asked through gritted teeth if she was too heavy. Her voice was just like that night, choked with sobs and hurt. For a moment, it blended with the voice of Wendy from our childhood, making me lose focus briefly. I said, "It's not too bad." To distract herself from the pain, Wendy talked to me about many things. She spoke of many childhood memories, some I knew, some I didn't. She also asked if I remembered the wristwatch she had given me before my birthday. I had never actually gotten around to asking how Wendy knew I liked that particular watch. Wendy laughed softly, saying she had noticed the first time I looked at it, and had prepared for a long time. Now that watch was still safely kept in her drawer. I felt a lump in my throat, looking ahead at the pitch-black path without saying a word. Wendy continued, saying that on my birthday, when I had rushed out into the heavy rain without looking back, she was about to chase after me when a phone call came through. There was an emergency at home. She hurried back. Those few days were hectic and overwhelming. She had planned to come talk to me as soon as things settled down. At that time, no matter what I said, she wouldn't upset me again. But when she was finally free, I had suddenly disappeared. My phone number was blocked, and all contact information vanished. She thought I was just in a mood, so she bought a cake and waited outside my house for a day and night. The cake had melted beyond recognition, but the door never opened. Then one day, out of the blue, she saw someone at school processing my transfer papers during class. Wendy's mind went blank, and she finally realized something was seriously wrong. She ran out. She begged her aunt over and over, but in the end, her aunt never gave her the exact address. Saying this, Wendy let out a small laugh. Her voice sounded both reproachful and guilty. She said I had transferred schools without a word, not even a goodbye. I lowered my eyes, not knowing what to say, and tried to change the subject like she had. I said, "Don't set up any more VIP accounts for me, and about the mortgage, I'll pay you back slowly." Wendy suddenly went quiet. After a long while, her voice hoarse, she asked, "Do you really not want to keep in touch with me that much?" I said, "I don't want to owe anyone anything. All those years, the Lambert family had taken care of me so much. The past should be left in the past. No one owes anyone anything." Wendy shook her head, saying she didn't want that. The cold wind howled in our ears. I could feel Wendy's voice trembling. I sighed. After a moment of silence, I said, "In a while, I'll be leaving this city to be a big shot at a branch office. Wendy was on my back. I felt her entire body suddenly go rigid. The wind was too cold. Wendy drew in a sharp breath, tears falling continuously. Her voice mixed with the wind, each word accompanied by deep breaths. "You're leaving again?" I gave a low in response. After that, Wendy didn't say another word. She remained silent, not speaking again, but kept wiping away tears. I took Wendy to the hospital, taking care of everything from top to bottom. The hospital room was quiet except for the sound of breathing. Wendy lay on the hospital bed, staring at me without moving, as if trying to permanently etch my image in her heart. After a long, long time, she finally spoke, asking with a smile, "When will you come back?" But that smile was too forced. I said, "Who knows? Maybe I will. If things go well, I might never come back." Wendy's eyelashes trembled slightly. Her eyes filled with a sadness I had never seen before. Then, "Will we ever see each other again?" I looked up at the window, shaking my head slightly. "I don't think so." As the words fell, the light in Wendy's eyes was completely extinguished in the darkness. She lowered her head, crying for a long, long time. A muffled "okay" squeezed out from her throat. On the day I left the city, snow was falling. The air was filled with a bone-chilling cold. I knew Wendy was not far behind me. Dependence is a frightening thing. I had fallen once before, left battered and bruised. When I chose to leave back then, I never intended to reconcile. The idea of mending a broken relationship seemed too fake. I refused to throw myself back into the heavy rain of my teenage years. I gripped my suitcase. Step by step, I walked forward, never once looking back.